For just 7 years, Huey Pierce Long held sway over Louisiana. However, those 7 years transformed Louisiana from a backwater state to a state finally growing and evolving. In addition, Long's national proposals made him a viable presidential candidate, and many of the same programs advocated by Long became features of Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal programs, Truman's Fair Deal programs, John F. Kennedy's New Frontier, and Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society. Was Huey Long a demagogue? Was he a dictator? Was he a fascist? Was he a populist? We will never resolve those questions, but he was definitely the first of the modern politicians of Louisiana. We now begin the lessons on the Kingfish. Known as the Kingfish because he took the name from a character in the radio and later television program Amos and Andy. The Kingfisher was shall we say, a smooth-talking, wheelin'-dealin' fella that ran circles around Amos and Andy. Huey Long came from Winfield. He was a political dynamo. We'll see his first run for governor, then the interim period, and then the election of 1928. Long triumphant, and then impeachment. Long the ruthless, and then Senator Long. Huey Pierce Long was born in Winfield, Louisiana, the capital of populism, the parish seat of Wynn Parish in the north central section of the state. He was the seventh of 9 children. He came not from a poor background or from a rich background. He came from a very middle class background. And it showed early on his character. He was expelled from high school for distributing a petition against the 12th grade. He passed the bar in 1915 despite not even having a high school diploma. He was a traveling salesman, that sounds about right. Met his wife Rose McConnell on a sales trip. He tried to be a preacher, but he felt that he was unsuited. Well, if more preachers were like that. He was exempt from World War I because he was married. That could have been used against him. However, he actually used it to his advantage because he never ceased to support veterans in anything that they did and often marched in parades with them. The red dot in the north central section of the state shows Winfield, Louisiana, which was one of the enclaves of populism that survived after the fall of the Populist Party. There were other places throughout the South that remained enclaves of populism as well. At the age of 25, Huey Long ran for the Railroad Commission, which we now call the Public Service Commission. He ran in 1918 and he won and used it as a stepping stone to higher office. He was a very unusual, groundbreaking candidate in that he campaigned via automobile and he used circulars and posters. He won in a runoff election. He was only 25 when he took office. His chief opponent, in a populist philosophy, in a populist political ideology, you need to have an enemy. You need to have something to rail against, somebody of the establishment, somebody of the wealth. And Standard Oil in Louisiana was just what the doctor ordered for Huey Long's populism. He became the chief opponent of Standard Oil and any corporation that he felt cheated the consumers. At only 31 years of age, he decided to run for governor in the election of 1924. He knew very well that he was not going to win, but he was setting himself up for the next office. Henry Fuqua was the old regular candidate. He was a Protestant. Hewitt Bouchot, who was John M. Parker's candidate, was a Catholic. Long was a Protestant from north central Louisiana, but he was not anti-Catholic like many of the people in north central Louisiana. He had no problem showing up at Mass throughout southwest Louisiana. Long campaigned person to person. He wore a white linen suit. He used the radio, and he used sound trucks. These are all innovative ways of politicking. Back then, politicians did not campaign themselves. They had people go out and campaign for them. What was Long's platform? Well, he was somewhat fuzzy on the Klan. Some, like Parker, who fought the Klan. Others embraced it. Long kind of never said yes or no about the Klan. He attacked Standard Oil. He attacked John M. Parker, who he found to be a self-righteous prick most of the time. And he attacked the old regulars. Then he made the big promise. Free textbooks to all school children. That was unheard of. He was going to modernize the infrastructure. He was going to build roads, bridges. He was going to make it easy to go from Shreveport to New Orleans. He was going to give public assistance to farmers who had long been suffering in his area of the state. Now, in the election, Fuqua won. But Long finished a very strong third, and that made him the kingmaker in this election because his support was sought out by both sides, and Long threw his support to Fuqua. Meanwhile, Long, knowing that Fuqua was an old man, immediately begins preparing for 1928. Long being from north central Louisiana could have been a liability as far as the city of New Orleans was concerned to him. So he solidified his support of New Orleans. He got the endorsement of the New Orleans States, led by Robert Ewing. He courted a dissident splinter group of the old regulars called the New Regulars. He made alliances in Acadiana with the Cajuns. He stayed on message in the fight against poverty. He backed and campaigned for Catholic Acadian candidates. He made numerous public appearances, again, attacking the establishment, Standard Oil, Fuqua, making friends and promising a brighter future for everyone. He was beginning to talk, in the words of his famous mantra later on, every man a king, but no one wears a crown. And you see there in his picture how very histrionic he could be when he was campaigning on the trail. In the election of 1928, Long did not have an incumbent against to run. Fuqua had died in 1926. O.H. Simpson, the interim candidate, was a very poor campaigner and speaker. Riley Wilson, who was a classical bourbon, represented the old ways that Long immediately excoriated. Long, meanwhile, his mantra, every man a king. Needless to say, Long won in a landslide. At just 35 years of age, Huey Long was triumphant as governor of Louisiana. He fulfilled almost every campaign promise in his first administration. He paved roads, he built bridges, some of which we're still driving on today. He provided free textbooks to children. He put in a homestead exemption. That is, the first several $1,000s of your property is not taxed. He put in elderly pensions, getting the admiration of the elderly. He brought natural gas to New Orleans. I had a great-grandfather who was working for New Orleans Public Service and met Long in person and said that Long basically came in and said, "This is how it's going to be, boys. We're going to have natural gas." That's why New Orleans has natural gas to this day. He made government into the largest employer in the state of Louisiana. He abolished the poll tax. That immediately made him a great number of friends in the African American community. And then he decided to build a new state capitol building. It would be the tallest capitol building in the United States, and it remains so today. Huey Long sounds like he was quite a great governor, but he was far from the ideal human being. He was crass. He was flatulent in public, belched often, was very coarse. He was rude to numerous people. He acted very common in the eyes of the much more dignified Bourbons and other aristocrats. Of course, that made Long even more attacking on them. And it sounds familiar to what's going on today, doesn't it? He also became the undisputed political boss of the state. When you worked in the Long administration, you worked for the states, for the state of Louisiana, you were expected to show loyalty to Long, support his candidates, and most importantly, there was the deduct box. 10% of your salary went into the deduct box, which you see there, and that 10% was untaxed, and it was unaccounted for income that Long could use at his absolute discretion in campaigns, in paying officials, and so forth. It was highly illegal, and yet he got away with it. Needless to say, this made Long quite a few enemies in the legislature, especially the supporters of the Bourbons and the old regulars. This eventually would lead to his impeachment and the attempt to remove him from office. The issue was a 1929 special session of the legislature in which Long proposed a 5 cent per barrel occupational license tax on the production of refined oil. This was designed to help the social programs, farmer subsidies, textbooks, and so forth. The state's oil interests did not like this. So they had their men in the legislature, and those men in the legislature moved to impeach Long, especially Cecil Morgan and Ralph Norman Bower from the north and the south of Louisiana. They charged Long with bribery, carrying concealed weapons, demolishing the previous governor's mansion, attempted murder, and they even charged him with blasphemy because Long was not opposed to saying "God damn it" every now and then. Things got so heated that on one day, a Monday, there was a fight on the floor of the House. It was called Bloody Monday. John Baptiste Fournier, the Speaker, was involved in the fisticuffs. Long then takes his case to the people, and he then issues the round robin letter, which was a circular letter sent to all the legislatures who would sign it, saying that they would not convict him under any circumstances. When 15 of the 39 senators signed the bill, or the letter, Long's opponents realized they didn't have enough to impeach, so they halted the proceedings. One of the darker sides of Long were the people that he kept around him. For instance, this man, Harry A. Battling Bozeman. He was a former prize fighter and personal bodyguard of Huey Long. Huey Long went nowhere without his bodyguards. One of the impeachment articles stated that Long tried to have Bozeman kill J.Y. Sanders, Jr., a member of the Louisiana legislature and the son of a former governor. Any politician that escapes an impeachment the way Long did, with such support, comes out even more emboldened. Remember, if you're going to try and pick off the top man, you better not miss, because that means everybody ducks and the top man is even more impregnable. And Long became ruthless after this. He said, "Before I used to ask, now I no longer ask." He fired people from jobs for even the slightest lack of support. He made people, when they were hired to work for the state, he made people write a letter of resignation right away that was put into their file. Anytime they stepped out of line, Long would simply pull the letter of resignation out and say, "I accept your resignation." He especially punished Mayor T. Semmes Walmsley in the city of New Orleans for its opposition. And using people like Bozeman, he used physical as well as political intimidation. There were plenty of newspapers that attacked Long, so Long established his own newspaper, the Louisiana Progress, to counter anti-Long circulars. You'll notice in these circulars that you see here that Long was fighting against what were called truthers. Everybody was putting out the truth about Huey Long and this, the truth about Huey Long and that. That Huey Long was the devil incarnate. It's very similar to many of the blogs and what you see in the social media postings today about the current administration and their opponents as well. Here yet is another circular that is designed to bring Long down. Read what Governor Parker says of Long, Frank Looney, Edward Gay, Nicholas Carbajal says of Huey Long. Long's Louisiana Progress would counter with its own propaganda, showing how children like Tommy could benefit from the books if they were able to afford their textbooks. Here you see Long in a typical post-campaign mode. He has just helped elect the man on the left of your picture, James O'Connor, known as Jimmy O'Connor, a close confidant and supporter of Long, to the Public Service Commission. On the far right is Oscar Kelly Allen, who would succeed Long as governor, at least in name. Long in the center. Jimmy O'Connor on the left would later become a juvenile court judge in Orleans Parish, and a young attorney coming right out of the Army started working for him by the name of John D. Fitzmaurice Jr., my father. Jimmy O'Connor was the man who would eventually gather Huey Long after he had been shot and take him to the hospital. As I said, Huey Long was exempted from World War I. There were many people that criticized him for his lack of war service. So what did Huey Long do? He marched with and supported World War I veterans. When they needed their bonuses during the Great Depression, Huey Long would march and send petitions to Washington. Get these men their bonuses. Huey Long liked to cast himself as a family man. There you see him with his wife, Rose McConnell Long, and several of his children. The one that's leaning up against the column is his son, Russell, who would be a U.S. Senator from Louisiana all the way into the 1980s. Huey Long also liked to go on the campaign stump, and he would often sing with gospel quartets. This was called the Old Rugged Cross, that would later be used by people such as Jimmy Davis. Singing with the gospel choirs was a great way to stir up the crowds, especially in Protestant North Louisiana. Here you see Huey Long at an LSU football game, and yes, that is Tiger Stadium behind him. 24,000 people would pack into Tiger Stadium for the football games. Long had the stadium built and, in fact, built most of the campus of LSU that you see today, because he had gone to Stanford University and was so impressed by the architecture that he copied the architecture from Stanford University. Here you see Long trying to use his influence with the officials during an LSU football game. Huey Long wanted to extend and expand Tiger Stadium, but the legislature said, no, you have to use it for a dormitory. So Long found an interesting solution. He built the dormitory right next to Tiger Stadium and then put the extension of Tiger Stadium on top of the dormitory. That is why at one time LSU's Tiger Stadium was the largest college dormitory in the world.